What's going on, educators? Welcome to Educators County. In this episode, we're going to focus on students you consider to be your toughest ones, yet they're your best ones. And yes, that's a pun, but you know what? You're going to grow them to be your most elite ones. This one's called Love the 10%. Ready, set, go. All of you have been through it. You either had or have that certain class where 1, 2, or even 3 students that have so many apocalyptic behavior concerns you just don't know what to do. You name it, they've done it. Constantly talking, refusing to do work, consistently off task, and zero academic productivity. Every day your hope is they will stay on task, be quiet, remain in their seat, respond only when they're called upon, and actually absorb every morsel of knowledge you're feeding them. Instead, they distract others, question your every directive, defined as their middle name, and their belligerent attitude drives you mad. On the other hand, when those anti-prized few are gone, the culture of the class literally morphs into an environment that is significantly different. Let's call it what it is. It's better, much better. It's not ideal, but it's far away from what it was, and it's closer to what you've always imagined a class should be. Everyone is more productive. Even the students tell you, Miss Teacher, class is much better today because certain students aren't here. You are no longer annoyed. The class is no longer annoyed. The students are soaking in every drop of knowledge, and you can actually see their minds taking in knowledge faster than Neo in the Matrix. Well, maybe not that fast, but you get the point. All that said, when a few bad apples are gone, the tree's looking pretty good. But if you had a third bad apple, he or she was probably on the fence and is more than likely a follower. When the other 2 apples are gone, the remaining apple transforms into a student you knew they always could be. This type of student does not want to be alone. He or she blends in with the others, and before you know it, they're on task, working hard, and behaving in a learning way you expected. It's not amazing, it's reality. Yet, so is the return of the other 2 apples back to your class. Let's backtrack for a second. For those 2 students that just returned to your class, is it wrong to categorize them as bad or good apples? Some may view categorizing as labeling, yet many parents do not want their child to have a negative label. Many of us agree that it's acceptable for children to be labeled with descriptions such as honor roll, all-American, valedictorian, etc. On the flip side, parents do not want their child to be labeled bad apple, alternative bound, bad kid, or even drop out. Going further, parents of the ideal students don't want the problem children or non-ideal students interfering with their good child's education or having their good child absorb, mimic, or take on the behaviors and values from the non-ideal children. From the perspective of the loving parent whose child may be viewed as non-ideal, it may seem like a catch-22, meaning the school is attempting to better my child by giving him or her the support and accommodations they need, but my child is being labeled negatively. Understood. Yet, if we don't identify and assist students who require greater or different needs, later in life that child might be labeled by society negatively and possibly permanently. It's our responsibility as educators to identify and assist those students now so that we decrease the probability of them becoming a negative statistic and increase the probability of them becoming a positive statistic for society for their teenage years and adulthood. To help identify those students that we're talking about, let's break it down even further. You know what your class sizes are, and you may feel as though you have too many students in your class. For this episode, we're going to begin with a class size of 26. Of those 26 students, 2 of them have attention demanding non-disorder, aka ADND. Yes, I just made that up. I really just made that up. It's not a medical term, so don't start going crazy and sending crazy comments about my made up phrase. I'm just describing what I see. Notice I said non-disorder, and I mentioned nothing about ADHD. But if you look at the top of the scale, you'll see ADHD. Anyways, the students I'm referring to are not on beds, and they don't have ADHD. Instead, they're just craving attention naturally. And yes, I might broadcast an episode of my made-up attention-demanding non-disorder, aka ADD, at a later date. Back to the numbers as we focus on the 10%. We're going to assume you have 2 or 3 students that have attention-demanding non-disorder. That being said, if 2 students in your class of 26 has it, that's 7.6%. If 3 of the 26 students have ADD, that's 11.5%. Let's go a little higher. We'll say 30 students, and we'll say 3 of them have self-identified themselves consistently as attention-demanding non-disorder students, which is clearly 10%. As you can see, the range is 7.6% to 11.5%. Keeping it simple, this is your 10%. But what I want you to understand is why I'm passionate about the 10% and how it was first introduced to me. While I was in the Air Force, we focused on the mission, but there were times when 10% of the airmen took up 90% of my time. This proverb grips strong in education. 10% of the students take up 90% of your time. Going further, 10% of the teachers take up 90% of administration's time. Yes, it just got quiet in the church. What percentage are you in? I have come to believe that no matter what occupation someone is in, if they hold a supervisory, teaching, managerial, team leader, or any type of leadership position in which they have a significant number of persons within their direct responsibility, the 10% proverb holds true. As for certain parents, in relation to their child's education, and many times not, the percentage is different. On certain days, 1% of the parents take up 99% of your time. Can I get an amen, administrators? And yes, the 1% will definitely be an episode at a later date. The bottom line is this: you know who your 10% are. But wait, let's turn that statement into a question. You may know who your 10% are, but do you really know your 10%? Are you having trouble answering that question? Are you hesitating when you answer that question? Is the answer being obstructed subtly or overwhelmingly by negative thoughts you have for your 10%? If so, put yourself in this hypothetical scenario. It's the end of class, and first block will be coming to a close in 10 minutes. First block has been a pleasant success, but second block is looming in the back of your brain because it brings Joe Smuckatelli and his sidekick, Johnny Doolittle. Your 10%. You're just hoping both will be absent. This morning while on duty in the cafeteria, you did not see them in the breakfast line. Your hopes are getting higher. You tell yourself, that's not right. I should not be thinking negative thoughts. Even though you have not looked at the daily ISS OSS list, you should not be anticipating their names being on that list. No, you tell yourself. Think neutral thoughts like maybe Joe is sick and you really hope he gets better next week. Or Johnny is supposed to be getting his braces adjusted, and maybe today is that day during your block. You wonder if the pain he endures during the adjustment of his braces will shut him up for a day. Wait, bad thoughts, no more bad thoughts. As the clock ticks down, there are now only 5 minutes left in your first block, but you're walking around the classroom proud because everyone is doing their exit ticket. But your happy thoughts are rattled when you hear a knock on your door. For the 3.5 seconds it takes for you to walk to the door, your mind goes blank as you wonder, who's interfering with my instruction and why? As you get closer to the door, you see a fellow teacher through your door's window. It's a familiar face. She's from across the hall. It's Miss Nonkinship, and she's smiling. You open the door, and she has not 1 but 2 special presents for you. With arrogant eyes, Miss Nonkinship looks at you and says, I know you're busy getting your class ready for the next block, and you know I am too. But you know Joe and Johnny, they normally just don't stay on task, and they didn't for me. So while in my class, both of them received their 3rd strike, but I want to give them a chance before giving the referral to the assistant principal. Miss Nonkinship continues by looking down at the boys and says, since this is your next class, I'm bouncing you both here, but you need to do better, okay? After she stops with her lame excuses, you look down at the boys with a Cinderella stepmother stare. In disgust, you look up again and make betrayed eye contact with Miss Nonkinship. You want to smack her smirk in the last year, but you can't because you're a professional. Remember, first block has not ended. Class transition is seconds away, and the dreaded anticipation of second block is creeping up your emotions and covering them like ants to an abandoned picnic. Profanity flashes through your mind like 100 Vegas neon signs. You turn your head to view the great first block still hard at work on their exit ticket. But then you turn once again to see the two boys, and that's when you see hope just fly out the window. In return, double frustration stares you in the face, and they hug you as if all of you were long lost friends reunited again. Okay, educators, what are your thoughts on the scenario you just heard? Would you address Miss Donkinship? If so, when, where, and how? What would you say to her? More importantly, how would you handle or work with the boys for the last 5 minutes of your first block? That being said, what about in your second block? What are your takeaways for this episode? To help you out, here are my 3 takeaways. Number 1, you've identified your 10%. Good. Number 2, 10% of the students take up 90% of your time. Yep, you know that's true. Number 3, do you really know your 10% in a positive light? How can we maintain hope and dissolve frustration? We're going to dive into those thoughts and feelings in another episode of Love the 10%, Part 2. That's all for now. Thanks for growing with me, and we'll see you next time in Educators County.